As we stand on the precipice of a new age of fighting games, the question always comes up, what kind of controller should you use? But before we get deep into all of this, I would appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. That really helps support what I'm doing here. So what controller should you use to play fighting games? There are a lot of strong opinions about this, but as someone who's relatively new in the fighting game space, just bear in mind that this is my opinion. You know, I've tried a couple of different control schemes, but what I say shouldn't be taken as the law. It is just personal preference at the end of the day. So let's stop wasting time and get into it. The first controller I'm going to talk about is your standard gamepad. The one benefit for a lot of people when it comes to controllers is you've held one before. Pretty much everybody, even someone who's not really a gamer, you've held a controller before, whether it's Xbox or PlayStation, over the decades that they've existed. So you're familiar with it. It's like riding a tricycle as a kid. That same skill with balance transfers over to real bikes. And whether you're riding a friend's bike or your grandpa's bike, those same skills transfer over. You're familiar, hey, it's two wheels, handlebars, I get what I'm doing here. Gamepads pretty much have that same thing going for them. You know, if you were born late 90s, you might have never been to an arcade. And if you have, you probably weren't playing Street Fighter. You probably don't have the experience of using a classic arcade controller, so there's going to be some muscle memory you don't have. The downside of using a controller, even though there is that familiarity, the familiarity is also a problem. I basically say this because game design is heavily linked to the controller that's going to be used for that game, and fighting games being used on regular gamepads have never really been a priority. So the control scheme has often not really been designed around using a gamepad, hence this whole modern control, classic control debate that's going on. This essentially creates this issue where certain buttons we're used to not really prioritizing in other games suddenly do become very important in a fighting game. So as a result, there's some muscle memory that most of us aren't going to have, and when we're expected to suddenly pull off these crazy combos using buttons that we're not used to using in quick succession, it's a bit uncomfortable and it can feel a bit awkward. I never experienced this, but people also say that using their thumb for the D-pad or for the left control stick, some people say that they get thumb pain doing that as well. I think having those cramped motions and the quickness in which you have to make those motions, it can be pretty uncomfortable. But there are pros winning tournaments that are using gamepads, so who am I to say that it's wrong? Now we'll move over to what I personally use to play these games, which is the classic arcade stick. Specifically, I use the 8-bit do or 8-bit do arcade stick, the one that has Bluetooth. Pretty good mid-range stick, and the Bluetooth is going to be hard for me to give up, even if I ended up having a higher ranged one. So the way I feel about arcade sticks, I wasn't around in the arcades during the Street Fighter booms. I literally maybe have touched an arcade stick once or twice in my life before I bought this one. So it's not like I had any prior muscle memory or anything, any prior experience helping me out. But I will say this, it feels good to play an arcade stick. So before we even get into the points of whether or not it's better or worse than using a gamepad, I would just say that it feels, in my opinion, much more fun to play on an arcade stick. There's something about, you know, being able to pretty much use your full force on this controller without worrying about a missed input or damaging your controller. Feels good. You can yank the stick all over the place, you can slam those buttons down with your fucking troll fists, you can do whatever you want, and things feel good. So I will definitely say, yeah, there is a definitive fun factor when it comes to using an arcade stick. And for a lot of people who prefer using an arcade stick, that fun factor is a big reason why. But we also have to talk about the actual facts as to why an arcade stick might be a better choice than using a gamepad. So it comes down to the gate. So for those of you who don't know what I mean by gate, if you've used a regular controller, a regular gamepad before, which as we've established you probably have, you know that it's a smooth circle. You know, if you want to spin that stick around, it's smooth all the way around. Whereas with an arcade stick, most commonly they have square gates. meaning that it's a box. So it's top left, bottom right, top right. It's a square. And as awkward as that might feel when you first use one, you realize how helpful that is for fighting games, because you're never really in between inputs. You know exactly where you are all the time because you can essentially ride the gate to see where you are. So if you're in the bottom left-hand corner, you are definitely in that corner. There's no guesswork, whereas if you're using a gamepad stick, there's some guesswork there. You might think that you're, diagonally down left, but you might actually be just left or just down. Moving to arcade stick completely eliminated that issue, and I always know exactly where I am. However, with that being said, there is still a dead zone on arcade sticks. This same issue exists for regular controllers, but it means that there is a point where you are not putting any inputs in. So if you need to go from left all the way to right, there is a split second where you're in the middle and you're inputting nothing. And our final controller example, the Hitbox, eliminates that issue. I'm going to put Hitbox and keyboard together because essentially their input style is the same, even though Hitbox would be the preferred choice due to its ergonomic design around fighting games. But essentially, a Hitbox feels a lot like an arcade stick, but you get rid of the lever. By getting rid of the lever, you essentially eliminate that issue of zero input when the stick is in the neutral position. That's entirely gone because it's like using a keyboard. Left is left, right is right, up is up, down is down. You can't mistake that. I haven't personally used a Hitbox before, so I can't really judge it, but it's not hard to see benefits. So the last thing that has to be discussed, which concerns all of the control methods you might use, is convenience and price. At the end of the day, you're going to have to pay for the controller you want to use, and no one likes spending money. At least I don't. And again, the benefit of a gamepad is chances are you already own one. If you play games already, whether it's on console or PC, you have a gamepad to use with it, and that means that you're probably not going to have to spend any more money on one. People might still disagree with that statement and say that you should buy a gamepad that's better suited to fighting games because not every gamepad is created equally, but at the end of the day, if you want to just plug in and play, you've got something that you can already use. Now, that same point kind of transfers over to what I like to call the soft hitbox, which is a keyboard. Most of us own a keyboard somewhere in our houses, and you can just use that and get the hitbox experience. It's not going to feel as good as a hitbox because you're using these tiny keys instead of buttons designed for fighting games, but there are a lot of people that do very well on keyboards. That's where arcade stick then comes in and ruins that convenience, because you can correct me if I'm wrong, but nobody who hasn't previously been into fighting games just has an arcade stick lying around. And on top of that, it's pretty expensive when compared to a regular controller, and I only say that because the price you're going to want to spend is probably going to be higher than you'd want to spend on a gamepad purely based on quality. You can get some cheapo arcade sticks, but you don't really want to get some cheapo arcade sticks. That same point transfers over to hitboxes. Finding a cheap hitbox, or correct term leverless controller, isn't super easy. You're probably going to be spending close to $100, dollars or pounds, regardless of where you are, for a decent hitbox, unless you're going to make one from scratch, and most of us aren't in that position. And even if you were going to make one from scratch, if you're getting good parts and a good chassis for it, you're still going to be spending probably more than you would on a standard gamepad. So it is choice at the end of the day, but if we're counting price and convenience into which control scheme you should use, gamepad kind of wins there. So I think that pretty much sums up most of the points when it comes to choosing a control scheme. I hope that helped you guys. If you made it this far, please like and subscribe. See you next time.